I had always imagined my sister's wedding as a fairy tale, and in many ways it was. The reception hall glowed with strings of fairy lights, glittering chandeliers casting soft patterns on the polished marble floor. Guests floated around like well-dressed phantoms, their laughter mingling with the soft hum of the string quartet. I stood by the dessert table, smoothing the soft blush fabric of my gown, trying to calm the restless flutter in my stomach. The cake was a towering masterpiece, a cascade of pastel roses winding around layers of delicate cream. My sister, radiant, in her lace gown, was dancing with her new husband, their smiles so bright it hurt to look at them. I wanted to be happy for her. I really did. But my father's presence across the room was like a storm cloud, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing. He had been on edge all day, snapping at the wedding planner and glaring at me whenever I tried to help. I had convinced myself that it was just the stress of the event, but I knew better. The tension between us had been simmering for months. My mother had warned me to just stay quiet, to not provoke him. It had always been that way. My father, the king of our small world, and me, the dutiful daughter who never quite lived up to his expectations. As the evening progressed, I found a quiet spot by the tall windows, watching the garden lights flicker outside. I let my thoughts drift, my fingers tracing the delicate silver necklace my mother had given me. It had been her mother's, a symbol of strength. I needed that strength now more than ever. When the time came for the toasts, I moved closer to the head table. My father rose, his glass raised high, a proud smile etched across his face. He started with the usual platitudes. How proud he was of my sister, how beautiful she looked, how happy he was to welcome her new husband into the family. I smiled faintly, grateful that for once his words were kind. But then, his gaze shifted to me, and I felt my stomach drop. "And then there's my other daughter," he began, his voice louder, almost harsh. "The one who thinks she's too good for this family. The one who has never appreciated the sacrifices we've made for her." A murmur rippled through the crowd. I froze, heat rushing to my cheeks. Was he really doing this now? "I've tried to teach her respect," he continued, his eyes boring into mine. "But some people just don't learn. Instead of helping her. Sister planned this wedding. She's been too busy with her own life, acting like she's better than us. Well, let me tell you something." His words blurred as panic swelled in my chest. I looked around. My mother was looking down, pretending not to hear, while my sister's expression was a mask of frozen shock. Guests exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of how to react. I felt as if the walls were closing in. And if you think, "You can just keep living under my roof without respecting me, think again," he spat, his voice dripping with disdain. "From this moment on, you're no longer welcome in my house. You're not my daughter anymore." The room went silent, a heavy, suffocating silence. I couldn't breathe. My heart pounded so loudly I thought everyone could hear it. Tears pricked the corners of my eyes, but I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. I straightened my spine, my hands trembling as I set my champagne glass on the table. Without a word, I turned on my heel and walked toward the exit, every step heavy with grief and disbelief. My father's voice followed me, still ranting, but I blocked it out, focused only on the door and the sweet, cold air that awaited me outside. Once I was outside, I let the tears fall, my sobs, muffled by the thick night air. The garden lights flickered like tiny stars, mocking me with their warmth. I pulled my phone from my clutch and dialed my best friend, but my hands were shaking too hard to hit call. I couldn't even think straight. In the distance, I could hear the wedding music start again, life moving on as if nothing had happened, as if I hadn't just been shattered in front of everyone I loved. I wanted to scream, to tear off the beautiful gown that suddenly felt like a prison. Instead, I sat on the stone bench at the garden's edge, staring at the dark sky, trying to piece together what had just happened. I wanted to go back in time, to pretend his words didn't cut as deeply as they did. But I couldn't. The truth was laid bare, raw and ugly, and I had no choice but to face it. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister, apologizing, saying she didn't know why Dad was so angry. I couldn't respond. I just sat there, the cold air biting through my thin dress, replaying the scene over and over in my head. A part of me wanted to go back in, to demand an apology, to make him see how cruel he was. But another part of me, the part that had spent years bending over backward for his approval, finally snapped. Maybe I didn't need his approval. Maybe I didn't need his house or his rules anymore. The thought terrified me and exhilarated me all at once. I looked at the necklace around my neck, remembering my mother's words about strength. Maybe it was time I found mine. The ride back to my cramped one-bedroom apartment was quiet, the kind of silence that presses down on you, suffocating and relentless. I stared out the bus window as the city blurred past, lights smearing into streaks of neon against the wet pavement. My dress felt too tight, my heels pinched at my feet, and the faint scent of champagne and regret clung to me like a second skin. I couldn't stop replaying his words in my head, the way his voice cut through, the air like a knife, sharp and deliberate. He had humiliated me in front of everyone, but the pain ran deeper than public embarrassment. It was the sudden, brutal reminder of all the sacrifices I had made, all the things I had given up just to be treated like I didn't matter. I reached into my purse and pulled out the small silver keychain I had carried for years. It was old and tarnished, a tiny replica of the house I grew up in. My mother had given it to me when I was 17, the day she got sick. I ran my thumb over its surface, feeling the roughness of the edges. "It's your home, too," she had said, her eyes watery but bright with determination. I clung to those words like a lifeline. But I had been wrong. It was never my home. It was his kingdom, and I was just another pawn. I wasn't always so bitter. There was a time when I thought my father was invincible. I remember watching him, when I was a child, standing tall in his office with his polished shoes and neatly pressed suits. He was larger than life, always commanding attention, always in control. My mother would sit quietly beside him during dinners, her hands folded neatly in her lap, nodding in agreement with everything he said. It was the only version of family I had ever known. But when my mother got sick, the curtain fell away. My father, for all his bluster and bravado, crumbled under the weight of responsibility. Hospital bills started piling up, envelopes thick with invoices stamped in red. At 16, I took my first job at a local diner, scraping plates and pouring coffee just to keep the lights on. My father always said it was temporary, that things would get better. But they didn't. I picked up more shifts, and then another job after school, and then another on weekends. By the time I graduated, I was working 3 jobs. I didn't go to college. I couldn't. There were bills to pay, groceries to buy, medical treatments to fund. My father, of course, took all the credit, boasting to friends and neighbors about how well he was providing for his family. He never mentioned the fact that I was the one behind the curtain, pulling the strings, making sure everything stayed afloat. It started small, requests for help with the electricity bill, then the mortgage, then the car payments. I never questioned it. He was my father. He was supposed to protect me, and I was supposed to support him. That was the unspoken agreement. But the demands grew. My mother passed away quietly one evening, her hand slipping from mine as I held vigil beside her bed. I remember my father crying that night, the first time I had ever seen him break. He wept for hours, cursing the world, clutching her photograph so tightly I thought it might shatter. I wanted to comfort him, but when I tried, He pushed me away. "You don't understand," he spat. "You don't understand what it means to lose everything." I almost laughed then. How could he think I didn't understand? I had lost my mother, too. I had lost my youth to endless hours of work, to the exhaustion that seeped into my bones, to the constant fear that one more late bill would mean losing our home. But I said nothing. I stayed silent, just like always. When my sister announced her engagement, my father threw a grand party in her honor. I was the one who paid for the decorations, the food, the invitations. I watched him shake hands and accept compliments for his generosity, for being such a proud father. My sister, glowing and beautiful, never asked where the money came from. I didn't tell her. I worked double shifts to cover the bills for her wedding, scrimping and saving, cutting back on groceries just to make sure her day was perfect. It was never enough, though. My father always wanted more. More extravagance, more prestige, and I, like a fool, gave it to him. People used to tell me I was generous, selfless even. But I wasn't. I was just trying to survive. As the bus pulled up to my stop, I stood up, feeling the ache in my knees from too many hours spent standing on linoleum floors. I stepped out into the night, the wind biting at my skin, and walked the short distance to my apartment. The lights flickered when I flipped the switch, and I made a mental note to call maintenance in the morning. I hung my dress on the back of the door, its blush fabric looking pale and lifeless under the fluorescent light. I sat down at the small kitchen table, the wooden surface covered in old bills and unopened envelopes. I picked up the silver keychain, again, turning it over in my hand. How many times had I held it, convincing myself that one day things would change? That one day, I would have a life of my own. A life that wasn't tethered to my father's demands or my sister's expectations. But that night, sitting alone in my drafty apartment, I realized the truth. My sacrifices had never been seen. My father had taken and taken, demanding more each time, never once acknowledging the cost. And I had let him. I had handed over my time, my youth, my savings, all because I thought it would make him love me. I swallowed hard, the taste of regret sharp and bitter. No more. I couldn't go back to that life. Not now, not ever. He had thrown me out like I was nothing, erased me from his world in a single breath. I wouldn't be crawling back. I stood up, my hand steady for the first time in hours, and walked to the window. The city lights blinked back at me, distant and indifferent. I thought of the bills sitting on my father's table, the ones with my name on them, the ones I had been paying for years. A slow, bitter smile spread across my lips. Maybe it was time he learned what it meant to fend for himself. The bus rattled to a stop in front of the house I once called home. Its engine coughed and sputtered before lumbering away, leaving me alone on the edge of the cracked pavement. I stood there for a moment, the cold night air biting at my skin, and looked up at the house. Lights burned bright in the windows, warm and inviting, but I knew better. I knew that warmth wasn't meant for me. I started up the path, the familiar crunch of gravel under my heels, echoing in the silence. But then I stopped, my breath catching in my throat. My things were scattered across the lawn. Boxes torn open, clothes thrown into the dirt, photo frames shattered. The night breeze caught the edges of papers, my papers, sending them skittering across the grass like fallen leaves. For a moment, I couldn't move. I just stood there, staring at the mess, my brain trying to catch up to what my eyes were seeing. My fingers went numb, and I dropped my purse to the ground with a dull thud. Slowly, I stepped forward, the wet grass soaking into my shoes. A gust of wind rustled through the branches, and I watched as my belongings fluttered and toppled over each other, chaotic and careless. Among the rubble, I saw the edge of my diploma, its frame cracked down the middle. I bent down, my hands shaking, and picked it up, brushing away bits of dirt and broken glass. My name was still there, bold and proud, but it felt distant now, like it belonged to someone else. Well, look who finally decided to come back, my father's voice boomed from the front porch. I looked up. He was leaning against the doorway, a glass of whiskey in one hand, the other resting on the frame like he needed it to hold himself up. His eyes were sharp, glittering with something that almost looked like satisfaction. "What is all this?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to keep it steady. He shrugged, taking a long sip from his glass. "I'm cleaning house. Don't need your clutter here anymore." "My clutter," I repeated, disbelief washing over me like a tidal wave. "You heard me," he said, straightening up. "You think you can just waltz out of my life after everything I've done for you? You're not my responsibility anymore. You've been living off me for long enough." I blinked, his words slicing through me. Living off him? The bills I had paid, the groceries I had bought, the hospital fees I had covered for my mother. They flashed before my eyes, each one a stinging reminder of every sacrifice I had made. My hands tightened around the frame of my diploma, the glass, biting into my palms, but I didn't care. The pain grounded me. It kept me from floating away under the weight of his accusations. I took a deep breath, tasting the damp night air. "You can't be serious," I whispered. He laughed, a deep, guttural sound that made my skin crawl. "I'm dead serious. You think I haven't seen you parading around like you're too good for this family? You've been a burden since the day you were born." My chest constricted, the words squeezing the air from my lungs. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to make him feel even an ounce of the pain I felt. But instead, I stood there, silent, the wind whipping my hair across my face. "Now, why don't you do us all a favor and get out of here?" he sneered, stepping back into the house. "Oh, and don't bother coming back. The locks will be changed by morning." The door slammed shut with a finality that echoed in my bones. I stood there, rooted to the spot, staring at the chipped paint of the door that had closed on me for the last time. For a moment, I felt hollow, like the wind could just pick me up and carry me away. But then something shifted. It started small, a flicker of warmth in my chest, growing brighter, stronger, until it burned away the numbness. Anger. No, not just anger. Rage. I dropped my diploma back onto the grass and squared my shoulders. My hands stopped shaking. My breath evened out. I wasn't going to cry. Not here. Not in front of him. Without another glance at the house, I began gathering my things, piling them into the trunk of my car with a kind of mechanical precision. The neighbors watched from their windows, curtains pulled back just enough to catch a glimpse of the spectacle. Let them watch. Let them see me walk away. I saved my mother's photo for last. It was still framed, untouched by the destruction that had rained down on the rest of my life. I picked it up gently, running my fingers over her face. Her smile was soft and kind, her eyes glimmering with warmth. She had always been my shelter from the storm, the only one who understood what it meant to be tethered to him. I whispered, a silent promise to her. I would be okay. I would make sure of it. That night, I sat in the tiny corner of my studio apartment, a cup of coffee cooling between my hands, and stared at the list I had scribbled onto a piece of scrap paper. Every bill I had been paying, every debt I had covered. Mortgage payments, utilities, credit card debts, each one neatly lined up, categorized and itemized like pieces of evidence. My hands were steady as I drew a single line through each one. Unpaid, unpaid, unpaid. It was strange how light I felt when I finished. How my breath came easier, my hands stopped trembling. It was as if I had been carrying the weight of that house, of my father's expectations and manipulations, on my shoulders for so long, I had forgotten what it felt like to stand tall. I folded the list neatly, placed it on the edge of my desk, and leaned back, closing my eyes. In the darkness behind my eyelids, I saw his face, twisted with anger and disbelief, when the first notices arrived. I imagined him scrambling to fix it, calling me, demanding I make things right. But I wouldn't. I wouldn't answer the phone. I wouldn't come running back. For the first time in my life, I would let him drown in the chaos he had created. And I wouldn't feel guilty for it. The apartment was nothing more than 4 walls and a flickering light bulb when I first moved in. The ceiling sagged with water stains, the wallpaper peeled back like tired skin, and the radiator hissed angrily every time I tried to coax warmth out of it. But it was mine. For the first time in my life, I was living in a space that wasn't ruled by someone else's demands. I walked across the creaking floorboards, letting my heels echo through the empty rooms, and smiled. It felt like freedom. Unpacking was both a revelation and a reckoning. Cardboard boxes filled with bits and pieces of my life stacked against the walls, most of them worn, many of them incomplete. A chipped teacup from my first job, a cracked mirror that still somehow held my reflection, a photo album with pages sticking together from years of humidity and neglect. I spent hours sorting through it all, discarding the things that held no meaning, holding on to the things that did. I found my mother's photograph buried beneath a pile of old scarves. Her smile, soft and patient, looked back at me, and for the first time in years, I allowed myself to cry. I sat on the floor, the photograph cradled in my hands, and sobbed until my chest hurt. It felt like a kind of cleansing, a purging of all the years I'd spent bound to a life that wasn't mine. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight spilling through the cracked blinds, painting the walls with patterns of light and shadow. I stretched, my back aching from the too-thin mattress I had dragged up 3 flights of stairs on my own. But the ache was a good one. It reminded me that I had done this. I had moved out. I had survived. And I was still breathing. I dressed quickly, pulling on the one suit I owned that wasn't frayed at the edges, and made my way downtown. I walked the streets with my head held high, my heels clicking with determination, and handed out resumes at every business that would take one. By the time the sun dipped low, I was exhausted, but hopeful. 2 weeks later, I landed a job at a local bookstore. The pay wasn't much, but it was enough. The smell of paper and ink greeted me each morning as I unlocked the doors, and I found solace in the way the sunlight filtered through the dusty windows. I learned how to balance my budget, how to make a week's worth of meals stretch with canned soup and day-old bread. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. The neighbors in my building were kind in a way I wasn't used to. Miss O'Donnell from 3B would sometimes leave a loaf of freshly baked bread at my door, and Mr. Lee from downstairs fixed my heater without asking for anything in return. They would smile and wave when they passed me in the hall, ask how I was settling in, and offer to help when I struggled with groceries or furniture. Their kindness felt foreign, almost suspicious at first. I wasn't used to people giving without expecting something in return, but slowly, I began to accept it. When Miss O'Donnell fell ill, I brought her soup and sat with her until her granddaughter came. When Mr. Lee's son graduated, I baked cookies for the celebration. I found myself becoming part of something, small and imperfect, but real. I was learning to live for myself. I didn't hear from my father. Not once. At first I wondered if he would come barging into my new life, demanding explanations and hurling accusations. But he didn't. The silence stretched on, and I grew stronger in its absence. Through whispered conversations with old friends, I learned bits and pieces of his unraveling. Late notices piling up, utilities being shut off, collectors calling at all hours of the night. My sister tried to reach out, her voice soft and careful over the phone, but I could hear the desperation creeping in. "You know he needs you," she whispered once, her words fragile and trembling. "I know," I replied, my voice steady and unyielding, "but I don't need him." And I meant it. One evening, I returned home to find a letter wedged beneath my door. The handwriting was familiar, looped and sharp. My father. I stood there for a long time, the paper cold against my fingertips. I traced the edges of the envelope, wondering if this was some kind of peace offering, or just another demand disguised as concern. I set it on the counter, untouched, and walked away. I didn't need to read it to know what it said. I poured myself a glass of cheap wine and sat by the window, the city lights flickering like fallen stars. I thought about the woman I had been, the one who had paid every bill, taken every insult, and smiled through it all. I couldn't recognize her anymore. She felt like a ghost. I leaned back, my gaze drifting to the silver keychain that now hung by my door, the tiny replica of the house I once called home. I had considered throwing it away, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, it hung there like a warning, a reminder of what I had left behind. I took a deep breath and looked out into the night, watching the lights blink in and out of existence. I was rebuilding my life one step at a time, learning to trust, learning to live, learning to love myself. And I wasn't going back. Time passed in quiet increments, weeks folding into months, each one marked by small victories and gentle revelations. My little apartment, with its leaky ceiling and peeling wallpaper, became a sanctuary. I painted the walls myself, covering the cracks with soft, warm colors that made the space feel like mine. I found an old armchair at a thrift store and carried it 3 blocks home, scraping my knuckles and staining my dress with dust. But when I finally set it down in the corner by the window, it felt like a throne. The bookstore job, once just a means of survival, slowly turned into something more. The owner, Mr. Grant, was a kind man with silver hair and a penchant for bad jokes. He taught me how to manage inventory, balance accounts, and even trusted me to run the place while he visited his daughter in Florida. I thrived in the routine, the gentle rhythm of it all, unpacking boxes of fresh-smelling books, ringing up customers, watching the seasons change through the storefront window. One rainy afternoon, I picked up a flyer that had been left on the tea counter. Financial Independence Workshop. Learn how to take control of your life. I traced the words with my finger, feeling something stir inside me. Control. It was a foreign concept, something I'd never truly held in my own hands. I signed up the next day. The workshop was held in a small conference room above a local cafe. Women of all ages filled the seats, their faces etched with determination and hope. We listened as the instructor, a sharp, confident woman named Maria, talked about budgeting, investments, and building credit. She spoke with fire and conviction, as if she knew firsthand what it meant to claw your way out of someone else's shadow. I took notes furiously, filling the margins of my notebook with ideas and questions. For the first time in my life, I saw a path forward, one that wasn't tethered to someone else's expectations or demands. I learned how to balance a budget, how to save for emergencies, how to invest wisely. Maria's words echoed in my head long after the workshop ended. When you own your life, no one can take it from you. I carried that with me, folding it into my heart like a secret promise. My confidence grew with each passing month. I opened a savings account, watched the numbers slowly tick upwards. I found joy in simple things, cooking meals from scratch, decorating my apartment with secondhand treasures, hosting tiny gatherings with the friends I had reconnected with. It was as if I had finally stepped into the sunlight after years of living in the shadows. One evening, while browsing through a local market, I came across a silver ring displayed on a velvet cushion. It was simple, just a thin band engraved, with a single word: freedom. I slipped it onto my finger and it fit perfectly. I bought it without hesitation. That night, I held it up to the light, watching it catch the glow of my bedside lamp. It shimmered like hope. It was a symbol, a declaration. I wasn't tethered to him anymore. I was free. The rumors of my father's financial unraveling reached me slowly, through whispers and hushed conversations. Old friends who had drifted away began calling, their voices thick with curiosity and thinly veiled judgment. "Did you hear? He's selling the house. Bank's coming for it." I would nod politely, make soft noises of understanding, and let them talk. But inside, I felt a strange mixture of relief and vindication. His kingdom, once built on the foundation of my sacrifices, was crumbling. Debt collectors were at his door, utilities were being shut off, and the house, the one I had poured years of work and money into, was slipping through his fingers. I didn't call him. I didn't reach out to see if he was okay. I knew he wasn't. But I also knew it wasn't my burden to bear anymore. My sister tried to reach out, leaving voicemails filled with desperation and poorly disguised guilt. She spoke of family loyalty, of how Dad just needs a little help, just until things get back to normal. I listened to each message exactly once before deleting it. Normal? Normal was me working 3 jobs while my father sat in his armchair, his hand outstretched for more. Normal was me paying the mortgage, the electric bill, the car payments while he bragged to his friends about his generous lifestyle. Normal was me breaking under the weight of his expectations while he threw grand parties and made me serve the guests. I wanted no part of their version of normal. I had reclaimed my life, bit by bit, dollar by dollar, and I wasn't going to hand it back. Not now. Not ever. One Saturday afternoon, as I was dusting the shelves at the bookstore, Mr. Grant came up behind me, clearing his throat. "I've been thinking," he began, rubbing the back of his neck. "You've been doing a damn fine job running this place. I was thinking of retiring next year, moving to Florida full-time. I'd like you to take over." I nearly dropped the feather duster. "Me? Run the bookstore?" He chuckled, nodding. "You've already been doing it, haven't you? All the hard parts anyway. I can help you work out the financing. We can set it up so you're paying it off monthly. No rush, no pressure. What do you say?" My heart swelled, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. I looked around the store, the rows of books, the wooden shelves, the cozy reading nook I had assembled from old furniture. It felt like home. It felt like mine. "I say yes," I finally whispered, my voice breaking with emotion. That evening, I celebrated with a bottle of wine and a good book. I sat by my window, watching the lights of the city twinkle and fade, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Pride. I had built this. I had survived. And now, I was thriving. I glanced at the silver ring on my finger, its delicate engraving catching the light. Freedom. I whispered the word to myself, savoring its taste on my tongue. And I knew my story was just beginning. The call came on a Sunday morning. The sky was still pale with dawn, the sun stretching its fingers across the city like it was waking from a long, restless sleep. I was sitting at my tiny kitchen table, sipping coffee from the chipped mug I had rescued from the thrift store when my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen, half expecting it to be one of the bookstore suppliers, or maybe Miss O'Donnell asking for a lift to church. But it wasn't. My sister's name flashed across the screen, glowing and urgent. I stared at it for a long moment, my hand frozen midair. The last time I had spoken to her, her voice had been thick with desperation, the thinly veiled guilt trickling through her words. I hadn't answered her calls since, but this morning, something made me swipe the screen and press the phone to my ear. She didn't waste any time. "He's losing everything," she blurted out, her voice trembling with panic. The house, the cars, the bank's coming for it all. He's drowning. I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. And he wants to see you. He said he wants to make things right. He needs your help. I almost laughed, the bitterness crawling up my throat like bile. My help? Since when does he want my help? Please, she whispered, her voice cracking. He's not well. I've never seen him like this. Just talk to him. If nothing else, just talk. For a long moment, I said nothing. I stared out the window, watching the city come to life, the flicker of lights in distant apartments, the soft hum of traffic just beginning. It felt like another world, separate from the one she was describing, the one I had left behind. But curiosity, it was a powerful thing. Finally, I sighed. Fine. Tell him to meet me at Rose's cafe. Noon. Thank you, she breathed, relief dripping from her voice. I hung up without replying. Rose's cafe was a small, sunlit corner shop just a few blocks from my apartment. I chose it on purpose. Neutral ground, familiar to me but foreign to him. He wouldn't be able to grandstand here, not with the smell of fresh bread and the clatter of dishes filling the air. I arrived 10 minutes early, ordered a cup of coffee, and waited. He walked in precisely at noon, his shoulders hunched, eyes darting nervously around the room. For a moment, I didn't recognize him. His hair, once slicked back with pride, was now streaked with gray, and his hands trembled slightly as he fumbled with the buttons of his coat. He looked small. I almost pitied him. Almost. He saw me and straightened, attempting to summon the same authoritative stride he used to carry. But the confidence was gone. His eyes darted to the other patrons before landing on me, and he crossed the room with forced composure. Sit, I said simply. He did, folding into the chair across from me with a heaviness that surprised me. I watched him for a moment, waiting for him to speak, but he seemed content to stare at his hands, knuckles knotted with age and tension. Finally, he cleared his throat. You look well. I raised an eyebrow, sipping my coffee. I am. He nodded, swallowing hard. His fingers drummed against the tabletop, an old habit of his when he was nervous. I hadn't seen him nervous in years. Your sister said... He paused, glancing up at me. She said you might be willing to... help. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. Help? His eyes flickered with something. Hope. Desperation. Maybe both. The bank is taking the house. Everything's falling apart. If you could just... I cut him off with a shake of my head. You want me to bail you out. It's not like that, he insisted, his hands clutching at the edge of the table. It's just... things got out of hand. I didn't know it would get this bad. I stared at him, the memories flooding back in waves, me handing him my paychecks, covering his bills, paying for groceries while he played the part of the generous provider, my fists clenched under the table. You didn't know? I asked, my voice soft and steady. You didn't know that you were living off of me for years? That I was paying for everything while you stood there and took the credit? His jaw tightened. That was different. We were a family. No, I said, leaning forward. We were not a family. We were a dictatorship, and you were the king. I was just the servant you didn't have to pay. He blinked, stunned by the sharpness of my words. I saw his hands tremble, his eyes flicker with something like shame, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. You threw me out like I was nothing. After everything I did for you, you humiliated me in front of everyone and tossed me out. My voice cracked, but I swallowed the emotion back down. And now you want me to save you? You want me to sacrifice myself again just so you can hold on to that house? His eyes glistened, but I couldn't tell if it was real or just another performance. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice barely audible. I'm sorry for everything. I studied him. The lines etched into his face, the weight of regret pulling at his features. Once, that apology would have meant everything to me. Once, I would have broken down and forgiven him on the spot, but not anymore. I slipped my hand into my pocket and pulled out the silver ring, the one engraved with the word freedom. I placed it on the table between us, letting the light catch its surface. His eyes followed the movement, confusion flickering across his face. This is what I am now, I said softly, tapping the ring. Free. Free from your expectations, your demands, your lies. He looked up at me, desperation clawing at his features. Please. No. I leaned back, my hands steady. I spent too many years carrying you, paying for your pride, cleaning up your messes. I'm done. I'm finally living for myself, and I won't give that up. The silence stretched long and heavy, broken only by the soft clatter of dishes and the distant hum of traffic. His shoulders slumped, his head hanging low. For the first time, he looked like a broken man, small, fragile, and entirely alone. I picked up my coffee and stood, slipping the ring back onto my finger. Take care of yourself, I said simply. I mean it. I turned and walked away, my footsteps light and steady. The sunlight streamed through the windows, spilling across the cafe floor, and for the first time, I didn't feel the weight of his expectations on my shoulders. I stepped into the street, the city bustling around me, and inhaled deeply. It tasted like freedom,